Welcome to our deep dive into learning English from scratch. We're going to be taking a look at Starting English, a beginner's guide.
Yeah.
You know, starting a new language, it can feel like a pretty big challenge, but we are here to help make it as fun and effective as possible for you.
Definitely. And one of the things that this guy really emphasizes is dispelling the myth that you need like some kind of natural talent for languages.
Right.
It's just not true.
Yeah.
Anyone can learn English if they've got the right approach and they're willing to put in a little bit of dedication.
So let's talk about that right approach. The guide stresses the importance of a strong foundation. What does that look like in those very beginning stages of learning English?
You know, you can kind of think of it like you're building a house.
Okay.
You wouldn't start with the roof.
Right.
You would lay a solid foundation first. And so in English, that means mastering the alphabet and pronunciation. It might feel basic, but getting these right from the start makes a huge difference in the long run.
It makes sense, but I'll be honest, pronunciation can be tricky. I remember when I was learning English, I struggled with certain sounds, like the th sound. It took me forever to get that one right.
Yeah, it's definitely a sound that a lot of learners struggle with. And that's why this guide recommends resources like the BBC Learning English app and Forvo. It's a website that lets you hear how native speakers pronounce different words.
Cool.
Hearing those authentic sounds is so helpful when you're first starting out.
Those sound like great resources. The guide also talks about mastering basic words and phrases, kind of alongside pronunciation. What's the reason for that?
Well, it's all about getting those kind of initial building blocks of communication in place, right?
Right.
So the guide focuses on simple sentence structures.
Okay.
Like subject plus verb plus object, I like coffee, and mastering common verbs, to be, to have, to do. These are like the workhorses of the English language, and it's amazing how quickly you can start to form sentences and express yourself once you have those down.
That's encouraging. So the guide then moves on to the importance of listening.
Yeah.
It talks about almost soaking up the language through your ears. Why is listening so important, especially when you're just beginning?
Well, listening is kind of like you're immersing yourself in the sounds and rhythms of English even before you fully understand everything.
Okay.
It's about training your ear to recognize those patterns, those sounds, and it'll make speaking and comprehension so much easier down the line.
So what are some of the most effective ways to get that daily dose of English listening?
Well, the guide recommends using a mix of different resources. Podcasts and audiobooks specifically designed for English learners like Slow Easy English, BBC Learning English, or ESL Pod are really great places to start.
Yeah.
Because they use clear pronunciation, simplified language.
And they cover so many different topics, too.
Right.
It's not just, boring grammar lessons.
Exactly.
You can find things about history, culture, even true crime.
Exactly. It's about finding something that interests you so that you actually want to keep listening.
Yeah.
And the great thing is you can kind of sneak listening practice throughout your day. You can listen during your commute, while you're cooking dinner, even while you're working out.
The guide also mentions watching TV shows with subtitles.
Yeah.
It recommends shows like Peppa Pig and Dora the Explorer, which I'll admit, those were my go-tos when I was learning English.
They might seem simple, but they are incredibly effective for language learning.
Really?
Yeah. They use clear pronunciation, simple language. They have these repetitive storylines, so they're easy to follow. And you can always switch on the English subtitles if you need a little extra support.
And who doesn't love a good cartoon?
Exactly.
It's learning disguised as entertainment. I like that. The guide also highlights the power of music. Why is music such an effective tool?
Well, music's a really great way to train your ear to the rhythm and the intonation of English. It helps you kind of internalize those natural speech patterns in a way that traditional learning methods often don't.
It's like learning without realizing you're learning.
Yeah.
I love that. The guide recommends artists like the Beatles and Adele for their clear pronunciation and relatively slower tempos. I used to try to sing along even if I didn't really understand all the words.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. And it actually leads us nicely to the next big hurdle that a lot of English learners face.
Okay.
Which is speaking.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking can feel really intimidating, but the guide has some really practical advice on how to overcome that fear.
Yeah, I remember being terrified to speak English out loud at first. I was so worried about making mistakes and sounding silly.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever experience that?
Absolutely. Everyone feels that way at first. But one of the most important things that this guide emphasizes is to speak from day one. The more you practice speaking, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
That speak from day one philosophy, I feel like that's a recurring theme in this guide. Why is that so important, even when you're just starting out?
Well, because speakings is where language really comes alive.
Right.
It's where you put all of that listening and reading and grammar in the practice.
Yeah.
And the guide really makes it clear that making mistakes is an absolutely essential part of the learning process.
Oh.
In fact, those mistakes are really valuable.
How so?
Well, they're like little signposts that are pointing you towards areas where you need more practice. They show you where your understanding might be a little shaky, and they help you focus your learning efforts.
Yeah.
So instead of seeing mistakes as failures, try to reframe them as opportunities for growth.
That's a really good way to look at it. But it can still be hard to overcome that initial fear of speaking.
Right.
What are some practical ways to get started with speaking?
Well, the guide suggests starting with some simple exercises like reading aloud from a book, or maybe just describing your day to yourself. You could even practice having conversations with your reflection in the mirror. It might sound a little silly, but it's a great way to get those speaking muscles working.
I've definitely had my fair share of conversations with the mirror. The guide also recommends finding a language partner. What are the benefits of having someone to practice with?
Well, having a language partner is really great because it's like having a personal cheerleader.
Yeah.
And a coach all rolled into one.
Nice.
They can give you feedback on your pronunciation, they can help you with new vocabulary, and most importantly, they can just give you the confidence to keep speaking, even when you make mistakes.
It's almost like having a built-in support system for your language learning. Where can you find a language partner if you're not in an English-speaking country?
There are a lot of really great apps out there that connect language learners from all over the world. Tandem, HelloTalk, italki are a few popular ones. And if you're feeling a bit more adventurous, you can always join an online or in-person English conversation group.
Awesome. Those sound like great resources. Okay, so we've talked about building that strong foundation, the importance of listening, and how to get over that fear of speaking. What about vocabulary? How do we go about building that vocabulary base?
So the guide introduces flashcards and spaced repetition as really powerful tools for memorizing new words. And it's not about mindless cramming.
Oh, okay.
It's about strategically reviewing words over time, so you can move them from your short-term memory to your long-term memory.
I've definitely heard of flashcards. Spaced repetition is a new one for me, though. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so spaced repetition is based on the idea that we learn best when we review information right before we're about to forget it.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of reviewing all of your flashcards every single day, spaced repetition apps like Anki or Quizlet, they'll actually schedule those reviews based on your performance.
So if I'm struggling with a certain word, I'll see it more often than words that I've already mastered.
Exactly. It's a really efficient way to learn and retain new vocabulary. And the guide even suggests some creative techniques to help you kind of incorporate new words into your daily life.
Like what?
Well, one suggestion is to label common household objects with sticky notes. So, for example, you could put a sticky note that says refrigerator on your fridge.
Yeah.
It might seem simple, but seeing those words in context can really help them stick.
I really like that idea.
Yeah.
It's like turning your entire home into an English learning environment.
Exactly.
I love it. The guide also emphasizes the importance of reading. What makes reading such a valuable tool for language learners?
Well, reading exposes you to a much wider range of vocabulary and grammar structures than you might encounter in just everyday conversation.
Okay.
Plus, it helps you develop your reading comprehension skills, which are really essential for understanding everything from news articles to academic texts to, all sorts of things.
Right. But reading in a new language can feel pretty daunting, especially when you're first starting out. What are some good places for beginner readers to begin?
Well, the guide recommends starting with materials that are engaging and accessible. Children's books, for example, use simple language, captivating storylines, and they can be a really good way to kind of build your confidence.
Yeah.
Think Dr. Seuss or The Very Hungry Caterpillar.
Oh, I love those.
Yeah.
Those are great. And those aren't just for kids. I still enjoy those sometimes. They're so fun. The guide also mentions graded readers. What are those exactly?
So graded readers are basically books that are specifically written for English language learners. They come in different levels.
Okay.
So you can start with a level that matches your current skills and then gradually work your way up to more challenging texts.
That makes sense. It's like having a personalized reading curriculum.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it. The guide also suggests reading simple news articles. Are there any specific websites or resources that you recommend for beginners?
Yeah, there are a few websites that specialize in kind of simplified news articles for English learners.
Cool.
One example is News in Levels, which basically presents the same news story at 3 different levels of difficulty.
Oh, wow.
So you can choose the level that's right for you. And as you progress, you can challenge yourself with a higher level.
That's a great resource. It lets you stay up to date on current events while also improving your English. Now, we've talked about reading, but what about writing? Is writing something that beginners should focus on as well?
Absolutely. Writing is often overlooked in the early stages of language learning, but it's a really powerful tool for solidifying your understanding of grammar and vocabulary.
I can see how writing would force you to really think about the language in a more structured way.
Yeah.
But where do you even start with writing when you're a beginner?
Well, the guide suggests starting with some simple exercises like keeping a daily journal. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just write about your day, your thoughts, your dreams.
What if you're staring at a blank page and you just can't think of anything to write?
Well, in that case, the guide recommends using sentence starters to get those creative juices flowing.
Oh.
Things like, today I went to, or I feel happy because.
Yeah.
These can help you overcome that initial writer's block and get those words onto the page.
That's really helpful. It takes away that pressure of having to come up with something completely original from scratch. The guide also suggests joining online writing communities. Why are those beneficial for English learners?
Well, online writing communities like Lang 8, they provide a safe and supportive space to practice your writing.
Cool.
And to get feedback from native speakers. It's a really great way to get personalized guidance and also to identify those kind of pesky grammar mistakes that can be hard to catch on your own.
Yeah, that's really valuable to get that feedback from native speakers. It can really help you to improve so much faster. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, grammar. It can be so intimidating for a lot of learners. How does this guide approach grammar learning?
Well, the guide emphasizes learning grammar in context rather than just memorizing a bunch of rules in isolation.
Okay.
It's about understanding how grammar actually functions in real-life communication.
So it's not just about learning the rules, it's about using them.
Exactly. And the guide recommends a variety of different tools and techniques to make grammar learning more engaging and effective.
Like what?
Well, there's some really fantastic interactive apps out there like Duolingo, Grammarly, and EnglishGrammar.org.
Yeah.
And they basically turn grammar learning into a game.
Nice.
They use quizzes, exercises, even personalized feedback to help you kind of master those tricky grammar concepts.
It's amazing how technology has transformed language learning.
It really has.
It's really cool. The guide also mentions something called the shadowing technique. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so shadowing involves listening to a native speaker.
Okay.
And repeating after them, almost like you're their shadow.
Oh, okay.
It's a great way to improve your pronunciation, intonation, and even grammar just by kind of mimicking those natural speech patterns.
It's almost like training your mouth to produce those English sounds more naturally.
Exactly.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground so far, but before we dive into even more tips, I want to touch on something that's really crucial, and that's goals and consistency. The guide really emphasizes the importance of setting realistic goals and staying motivated. Why is that so important in language learning?
Well, it's easy to feel overwhelmed when you're learning a new language.
Right.
Because there's just so much information to take in.
Yeah.
But setting realistic goals can help you kind of break that overwhelming task into smaller, manageable chunks.
Okay.
So it's about focusing your efforts and then celebrating those small victories along the way.
I've definitely felt that overwhelm when learning languages. It can be really discouraging when you feel like you're not making progress as quickly as you'd like.
Yeah.
How can someone go about setting those realistic goals that will help them stay motivated?
So the guide introduces the concept of SMART goals, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Okay.
So instead of saying, I want to learn English, you could set a goal like, I will learn 10 new words every week using flashcards.
Yeah.
Or, I will practice speaking English for 10 minutes every day with a language partner.
I like that. Those are much more specific and actionable goals.
Right.
And it's a lot easier to track your progress
Yeah.
and stay motivated when you have those clear targets to aim for. The guide also stresses the importance of actually tracking your progress. Why is that so important?
Well, tracking your progress is like giving yourself a visual reminder of how far you've come.
Okay.
It can help you stay motivated.
Yeah.
And celebrate those small wins along the way, which can be so encouraging.
I love that. It's like having a tangible record of your growth. What are some good ways to track your progress?
You can use a simple notebook, a spreadsheet, or even one of those fancy language learning apps that have those built-in progress trackers.
Yeah.
The key is to find a method that works for you that you'll actually stick with.
You know, I used to be really bad at tracking my progress.
Yeah.
And then I discovered this app called Habitica, which basically turns your goals into this like fun little RPG game.
Oh, cool.
And it's been so motivating.
That's awesome. And I think that's a great example of finding ways to make language learning fun and engaging, because that's so crucial for staying motivated in the long run.
Absolutely. And speaking of fun and engaging, the guide ends on this really cool concept called the immersion station. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so the immersion station is all about creating an English-speaking environment for yourself,
Okay.
even if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
Okay.
It's about surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible.
That sounds really intriguing. How can you create an immersion station in your own home?
Well, the guide suggests some simple things like changing the language settings on your phone and your social media to English.
Yeah.
Just seeing those everyday words and phrases can actually make a big difference.
Right.
You can also try listening to English radio or podcasts while you're doing things around the house.
Yeah.
Maybe watching English movies and TV shows with subtitles, or even reading English books and articles.
It's like turning your daily routine into a language learning experience. I
Exactly.
love it. The guide also mentions thinking in English as much as possible.
Yeah.
Is that even possible, especially when you're just starting out?
You know, it might feel a little strange at first, but the more you practice thinking in English, the easier it will become.
Yeah.
You can start by simply describing your surroundings in English in your head.
Oh.
Like, I am sitting at my desk, I am looking at my computer, I am drinking a cup of coffee. As your vocabulary grows, you can start to think in more complex sentences and even have internal conversations in English.
That's a great tip. It's like training your brain to think in a new language.
Exactly.
The guide also emphasizes the importance of connecting with other English learners. Why is that so valuable?
Well, I think connecting with other learners just gives you that sense of community
Yeah.
and support. It's a chance to share resources,
Okay.
to practice speaking,
Yeah.
to encourage each other along the way.
Right.
You know, it's much easier to stay motivated when you know that you're not alone on this journey.
Absolutely. The guide mentions online communities. Are there any specific communities or resources that you would recommend?
Oh, there are tons of really fantastic online communities out there.
Yeah.
It really depends on your interests and your learning style.
Yeah.
But some popular options include Facebook groups, Reddit forums, and Discord servers that are dedicated to English learning. You can also find online language exchange platforms where you can connect with native English speakers who are learning your language.
Wow, there are so many options to choose from. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of what this guide has to offer.
We definitely have. But before we wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into learning English, I want to leave you with something to ponder. Of all these amazing strategies that we've talked about, what stands out to you as the most exciting or maybe even the most surprising?
You know, one of the things that really fascinated me was how this guide kind of reframes our understanding of mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of seeing them as failures, it really encourages us to see them as like these stepping stones to fluency. It talks about this concept of interlanguage, this idea that as we learn a new language, we create this unique system of our own that gradually evolves to become closer to the target language, which I think is really interesting.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. So those early mistakes are actually a sign that our brains are actively trying to make sense of this new language system.
And it's like our own personal language evolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, the guide reminds us that even native speakers, they make mistakes too.
Right.
Language is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
So it's important to embrace those stumbles, learn from them, and just keep moving forward.
I love that perspective. It takes a lot of pressure off. The guide also emphasizes the importance of actually making language learning fun. It even suggests finding ways to kind of incorporate English into activities that you already enjoy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're a foodie, maybe try following some English-speaking chefs or food bloggers. If you love music, really dive into the lyrics of your favorite English songs. If you're into gamer, join an online game with English-speaking players.
Yeah.
The possibilities are kind of endless.
That's such a good reminder. It's about finding those little pockets of joy in your day and just injecting a bit of English into them. It doesn't have to feel like a chore at all. Now, the guide provides so many practical tips and resources, but it can still feel kind of overwhelming to know where to begin.
Right.
Any advice on how to avoid feeling paralyzed by all those choices?
Well, that's where setting those SMART goals that we talked about can really come in handy.
Yeah.
Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right.
It's about breaking down your language learning journey into smaller, more manageable steps.
Can you give us an example of what a SMART goal might look like for someone who's just starting out?
Sure. So instead of just saying, I want to improve my English, you could set a goal like, this week I will listen to one episode of the Slow Easy English podcast every day during my commute to work.
Okay.
That goal is specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant to your interests, and it's time-bound.
I love that. That's so clear and actionable. And by setting that time frame, you're really creating that sense of accountability, like you're making a promise to yourself to actually do it.
Exactly. And, the guide also emphasizes the importance of tracking your progress. No matter how small those steps might seem.
Right.
Whether you use a notebook, a spreadsheet, an app, visually seeing those little wins can really help you stay motivated.
I used to think that tracking my progress was just an extra step, but I've actually found that it's such a game changer. Like seeing those check marks or those streaks on a language learning app, it just feels so satisfying. It's like you're giving yourself a pat on the back for your hard work.
It is. And it also helps you identify patterns in your learning. Maybe you're consistently acing those vocabulary quizzes, but you're still struggling with listening comprehension.
Right.
So being aware of that can help you adjust your learning strategies and focus on areas that need a little bit more attention.
That's such a good point. It's about being mindful of your strengths and weaknesses and tailoring your approach accordingly. Speaking of support and motivation, the guide also talks about finding a language learning buddy. What makes having a partner so valuable on this language learning journey?
Well, having a language learning partner is like having, a built-in cheerleader and accountability partner. They can relate to your struggles.
Right.
They can celebrate your victories with you.
Yeah.
And they can also give you that little extra push when you're feeling discouraged.
It's like having someone to share the journey with.
Yeah.
Someone who understands those ups and downs of language learning. It's so much easier to stay motivated when you know that you're not alone.
Where can someone find a language partner if they don't, already know people who are learning English?
Well, there are so many online platforms and communities that are dedicated to connecting language learners.
Oh, cool.
Some popular ones are HelloTalk, Tandem, italki. You can even find language exchange meetups.
Oh, nice. In your local area where you can practice with other learners and even native speakers.
Those are great resources. I also love how this guide encourages us to think outside the box and find these little creative ways to immerse ourselves in English, even in small ways. What are some of your favorite outside-the-box strategies for learning English?
One of my favorites is to change the language settings on my phone and computer to English.
Yeah.
It's a small change, but it exposes you to the language every single day.
Right.
Even if it's just navigating through your settings or reading notifications.
I've done that too, and it's amazing how quickly you start picking up those everyday words and phrases. It's like passive learning.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
You can also try, listening to English podcasts or audiobooks while you're doing chores around the house, watching English movies and TV shows with the subtitles on.
The guide also mentioned this idea of thinking in English as much as possible.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty daunting.
It can be.
Is that even possible, especially for someone who's just starting out?
It is. And it might feel a little strange at first.
Yeah.
But it's a really powerful technique for internalizing the language. You can start by just describing your surroundings in English in your head. Say,
wow.
I'm sitting at my desk. I'm looking at my computer. I am drinking a cup of coffee.
Okay.
And as your vocabulary and your grammar skills improve, you can start thinking in more complex sentences.
Yeah.
You can even start having internal conversations in English.
I love that. It's like having this little English-speaking world inside your head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, the guide also emphasizes the importance of just being patient with yourself.
Right.
And celebrating those small victories along the way. Why do you think that mindset is so crucial when you're learning a new language?
You know, language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes patience. And it's so easy to get discouraged when you feel like you're not progressing as quickly as you'd like. But it's so important to remember that every step forward, no matter how small, it's a victory.
Exactly. It's about focusing on the journey.
Yeah.
And not just the destination. And it's about finding joy in that process of learning.
I love that. Speaking of celebrating those victories, let's take a moment to kind of recap all the amazing strategies and insights that we've covered in this deep dive. We started out by talking about the importance of building that solid foundation, mastering the alphabet, pronunciation, some basic vocabulary, and those essential grammar building blocks.
Right. And then we moved on to the power of listening, immersing ourselves in the sounds of English through podcasts, audiobooks, TV shows with subtitles, even music. And we learned how to reframe those mistakes, not as failures, but as valuable feedback.
Exactly. We tackled that fear of speaking head on, encouraging all of you to speak from day one, to find a language partner, to embrace those early stumbles as stepping stones on that path to fluency.
Absolutely.
We discovered the power of flashcards and spaced repetition for building up our vocabulary. And we even talked about some more creative ideas like using sticky notes and turning our homes into these mini English immersion zones.
Exactly. We also talked about the joy of reading.
Yeah.
Starting with those simpler, more engaging texts like children's books and graded readers.
Yes.
And then gradually working our way up to more challenging material.
And we debunked that myth that writing is only for advanced learners.
Right.
We encouraged you to express yourself freely through journaling, to use sentence starters to overcome that writer's block, and to connect with other English learners in those online writing communities.
Yeah, those are so helpful. And of course, we couldn't forget grammar.
Yeah.
We talked about how to see it not as a set of rigid rules, but more as like a framework for communication. We looked at some interactive apps, that shadowing technique as well, all those fun, engaging ways to really internalize those grammar patterns.
And maybe most importantly, we discussed setting those SMART goals.
Yes.
Tracking our progress, celebrating those small wins, and finding the joy in this process of learning English.
Absolutely. It's been quite a journey, wouldn't you say?
It has been a huge journey exploring all these strategies, but here's the thing. This is just the beginning. The real magic happens when you take all of this knowledge and put it into practice.
Right. You know, this deep dive has given you a toolbox. It's full of all those powerful tools and techniques.
Yeah.
Now it's your turn to choose the ones that resonate the most with you and start building that personalized language learning path.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. Learning English, it's not just about acquiring a new skill. It's about opening up a whole new world of possibilities.
It really is. It's about connecting with people from different cultures, exploring new ideas, expressing yourself in ways that you never thought possible.
It's about expanding your horizons and embracing the beauty of human communication.
So go out there, embrace the challenge, and remember to have fun along the way.
We're cheering you on every step of the way.